Wow, a live audience. I get to see my audience. That never happens, you know. I sit there in the morning by myself in a darkened room and do morning edition, so it's nice to see you all. I respectfully disagree with my friend Dan Israel, who I adore. The legislature is a very painful place. I know this for a fact. Well, I love the focus of tonight, growing pains. I love the focus, and here's a news flash for you. I discovered that growth can be painful, and pain can fuel growth if you let it. And I made those discoveries during an especially painful several-year stretch of my life, which very few people knew about at the time, because when you're on the radio, you have to pretend that everything's fine, when actually your life kind of sucks. So those years revolved around disease, disability, divorce, and death, and pretty much in that order. So I'm really not the life of the party when I show up. One of my teachers during this time was a guy by the name of Bruce Kramer. And Bruce was an amazing guy, thank you. If you happen to listen to my series of conversations with Mr. Kramer on Minnesota Public Radio, they were all about how do you live with disease, disability, and impending death. And Bruce never got into the symptomology of his disease, which was ALS. He was really philosophical about what it was like to live with death sitting next to you all the time, waiting until it was ready to come for you. One of my teachers during this time was Bruce because he was really one of the best teachers I could ever have. And he would say that the best, most ruthless and exacting teachers he ever had was ALS, the disease that ultimately killed him. Bruce would say that the lessons the disease taught him were deeper than the many losses he'd suffered because of that disease. Each loss that he felt was a teachable moment, an opportunity, he said, to grow until growth was no longer possible. And he tried to keep growing as a human being until he died in March of 2015. And in those years when I talked to Bruce for NPR on what it's like to live each day with death sitting quietly next to you waiting, he really captured the psyche and the hearts of our audience. And we ended up writing a book together called We Know How This Ends, Living While Dying. Bruce was pretty Buddhist in his life philosophy, even though he was a Buddhist Methodist. I don't know how that works, but it's true. He came to realize that he could succumb to the pain of the many mounting losses meted out by this insidious disease, or he could learn to accept each one and learn from the circumstances. And this, if I may, read from the book, is what he wrote about acceptance. I find it harder and harder to remember the old normal assumptions that served as a foundation for my able-bodied life. But I can remember a few. If only I could eat correctly, exercise enough, hold all things to moderation, devote myself in equal measures to my family and my job, I would have a great chance of living past 90 and looking back on a life well lived. I remember joking that I wanted my epitaph to be, "He died racing semis on his bike." There is such a human arrogance to these assumptions, and I weep in empathy for that old normal. This is Bruce, by the way, that cut off of the mic. He always appears whenever I talk about him. The assumptions were like sand foundation in which I build my life. It took one major storm to splinter my life along the fault lines that we carry as able-bodied persons. The irrational belief that we will control how we live and how we die. Now I move neither my arms nor my legs. I have no semblance of fending for myself. I am totally reliant on my caregivers. My rebirth in ALS, now 4 summers old, is a series of circles moving from loss to loss to loss until I'm back to something I must lose again. The drop of the toe becomes the flop of the foot, becomes the loss of the leg, becomes the inability to support weight in a standing position. In so many ways, is this not the normal pathway in which all humans find themselves? Is this not a normal progression to speed it up? The hard-scrabble work of keeping up with the losses as they cascade one upon the other, finding the meaning in each drop of water flung over the edge of life's waterfall is something I can point to from this vantage point of advanced disease as necessary to growth, even as I diminish, pulled into the essence of what it means to be a living human being. I'm just aging exponentially faster than most. Now, I know what you're thinking, that you don't need this right now. You don't want to think about it. You have plenty of time. Tra-la-la, live for today, gather ye rosebuds, blah, blah, blah. You would be totally correct in thinking this way until you suddenly need a way of thinking in the immediate right now that accounts for when your time has dwindled, compressing itself into what you have left. The assumptions of a long life are like that sands under our foundations, powerful and hard to resist, a natural response so that life appears to be somewhat happy, a foot to the pedal, gas-powered, 400 horsepower response that does not veer easily into despair. I get this. I really do. My spiral has been one of an able-bodied fix and cure mentality, circling down to the deep reflection of what it means to acknowledge loss, to finally learning acceptance and gratitude for what I have. I've moved from unconsciously seeking the cure, the absolute rebuttal of the natural way of things, to consciously embracing the reality of frailty. This new foundation, built upon the acknowledgement of just how fleeting is life, is a foundation of stone that resists all hubris. Bruce's death came shortly after my dad's, and then the death of my marriage one day after my father's passing. And it was kind of a triple scoop of loss, grief, and pain. But I managed somehow to follow the example of my friend and teacher, Bruce Kramer, to embrace the losses, grow into and through each one, and now I'm standing here in front of you, ready for whatever comes next. And I'm ready to hang on, because it's been a hell of a ride so far. I can only imagine what's to come. Thank you for being here tonight. It's so much fun. Katie?